Stefan dangled the battered, grease-stained notebook over the roaring industrial gas burner. The flames licked at the cracked leather binding, hungry for the secrets inside. "You think this trash makes you a chef?" Stefan sneered, his face flushed with the heat of the kitchen and his own arrogance. "It's just garbage, like you." Felix didn't scream, he didn't beg, he just calculated the distance between his mop bucket and the head chef's wrist. He had spent 3 years being invisible. But tonight, the invisibility ended. To understand why a dishwasher was about to assault the most famous chef in the city, we need to go back 48 hours. The kitchen of Times, l'héritage, Times, was a war zone of stainless steel and shouting. It was the most prestigious restaurant in the district, built on the legacy of the legendary Chef Beaumont, who had vanished 10 years ago. Now, it was run by Stefan, a man whose ego was larger than his talent. Felix stood at the sink, elbow deep in gray water that smelled of lobster shells and bleach. He was nobody here, just the mop. But in the deep pocket of his oversized, stained apron, Felix felt the familiar weight of the notebook. It was a chaotic mess of pages, held together by rubber bands and hope. The leather cover was cracked like a dry riverbed, and it smelled faintly of thyme and old pipe tobacco. "The bisque is wrong again," Stefan shouted from the pass, hurling a tasting spoon across the room. It clattered loudly against the tiles, spinning to a stop near Felix's boot. "It lacks soul! Who prepped the stock?" The sous chefs looked at their feet. The kitchen went silent, save for the hum of the ventilation and the bubbling of the great stock pots. Stefan was panicking. The Michelin Guide critic was rumored to be visiting this week, and the signature dish, Chef Beaumont's Storm Bisque, had never tasted right since the takeover. Felix kept scrubbing a burnt pan, but his eyes darted to the bubbling pot. He knew exactly what was missing. He touched the notebook through his apron fabric. Page 42. Asterisk. The zest of a star anise. Toasted until it smokes. Not just added raw. Asterisk. Later that night, the kitchen emptied out. The lights dimmed to a single hum. This was Felix's time. He pulled the notebook out. The pages were yellowed, covered in a handwriting that looked like spiderwebs. It wasn't just recipes. It was a philosophy. He walked to the rejected pot of bisque. Stefan had ordered it to be dumped in the morning. Felix dipped a finger in. Too acidic. No depth. He opened the notebook to the corrections section. He moved silently, grabbing a jar of fennel seeds and a heavy cast-iron skillet. He didn't turn on the main lights. The glow of the pilot lights cast long, dancing shadows against the wall as he worked. He wasn't just seasoning a soup. He was conducting a séance. He tossed the seeds into the dry pan. The smell hit the air instantly warm, licorice, sweet, and earthy. He stirred it into the massive pot, followed by a specific pinch of smoked salt that the notebook specified for rainy Tuesdays. He tasted it again. Perfection. The flavor wasn't just food. It was a memory of a better time. Felix quickly cleaned his station, shoved the notebook back into his hidden pocket, and left. He didn't know that the security camera in the corner, usually broken, had been repaired that morning, and he didn't know that Stefan was watching the feed from his office, his eyes narrowing as he saw the janitor fixing his masterpiece. The next morning, the kitchen was buzzing with a different kind of energy. The morning prep team had tasted the bisque. They were whispering. Then, it's back, one sous chef murmured, dipping a piece of bread into the cold pot. It tastes like Beaumont cooked it himself. Stefan stormed in, his pristine white jacket stiff with starch. He looked tired. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He walked straight to the pot, tasted it, and froze. The flavor was undeniable. It was rich, complex, and humiliating. He knew he hadn't cooked this. He spun around, his eyes locking onto Felix, who was silently stacking plates by the dishwasher. "Office. Now," Stefan barked, pointing a finger that trembled slightly. Inside the glass-walled office, the air smelled of stale espresso and fear. Stefan sat behind his mahogany desk, tapping a silver pen against the glass surface. "You touched my station," Stefan said, his voice dangerously low. "I saved the soup, chef," Felix replied, his voice calm. It was the first time he had spoken more than 2 words to Stefan in a year. "You tampered with food. That's grounds for immediate termination." Stefan stood up, walking around the desk. He wasn't angry because of the safety violation. He was angry because a dishwasher had better instincts than him. Stefan paused by the window, looking out at the rain. For a fleeting second, his shoulders slumped. "My father bought this place for me," he whispered, almost to himself. "He said if I couldn't keep the star, I was cut off. I can't lose the star." It was a moment of pure, pathetic honesty. The tyrant was just a scared child in a costume, but the moment passed as quickly as it came. Stefan turned back, his eyes hardening. "What did you put in it?" "I saw you reading something." "Give it to me. It's personal," Felix said, stepping back. He clamped his hand over his pocket. "Nothing in this kitchen is personal. Hand it over, or I call the police for theft of trade secrets." Reluctantly, Felix pulled out the notebook. It looked absurd in the sleek, modern office, a relic of the past. Stefan snatched it. He opened it roughly. The pages crinkled. He squinted. "What is this?" "This isn't French. It's code. It's shorthand," Felix said. "Old shorthand." Stefan flipped through the pages. Grease stains, burn marks, sketches of vegetables that looked like caricatures. He laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "This is trash. It's a diary of a madman. And you think this makes you a chef? You're a cleaner, Felix. You clean. You don't create. That book is worth more than this entire building," Felix said, his fists clenching at his sides. "Is it?" Stefan smiled, a predator sensing weakness. "Then, let's see how well it cooks." He marched out of the office, carrying the notebook like a trophy. Felix followed, panic rising in his chest. Stefan walked straight to the main line, where the gas burners were roaring for the dinner service. "Everyone stop," Stefan yelled. The kitchen froze. "We have a spy, a rat who thinks he can teach us how to cook from a garbage pile." He held the notebook over the fire. "No!" Felix shouted, lunging forward. 2 sous chefs, reacting on instinct to protect their boss, grabbed Felix's arms. They held him back, but they looked uneasy. "This is what happens to trash," Stefan sneered. The heat curled the corners of the cover. "Read the last page," Felix screamed, struggling against the grip of the cooks. Stefan paused. The desperation in Felix's voice wasn't about a recipe. It was about survival. He hesitated, the flames just inches from the binding. The kitchen was silent, save for the hiss of gas. Stefan, compelled by a flicker of curiosity, pulled the notebook back. He flipped to the very back. The back cover was unusually thick. The leather had been glued over something rigid. Stefan's fingernail caught a loose edge, where the heat had melted the old adhesive. He ripped it open. A folded document slid out, yellowed parchment protected by a sheet of wax paper. Stefan unfolded it. His eyes scanned the document, and his face went the color of curdled milk. It wasn't a recipe. It was a deed of trust. "What is this?" Stefan whispered. "My grandfather didn't vanish," Felix said, his voice carrying across the silent kitchen. The sous chefs loosened their grip on him. He retired. He wanted to see if the new generation had the heart to maintain his legacy before he passed it on officially. He left the deed in the only place he knew a real chef would look inside the work. Stefan read the name on the deed. Asterisk. Felix Beaumont, asterisk. You're the grandson?" Stefan looked from the paper to the dishwasher. The resemblance was suddenly terrifyingly clear. The set of the jaw, the eyes, and you, Felix continued, stepping forward as the sous chefs released him completely. Just tried to burn the proof of ownership. Stefan crumpled the paper in his fist. This proves nothing. It's old. I own the lease. Read the clause at the bottom, Felix said, pointing. If the quality standard drops below a certain rating, or if the current management destroys the founder's archives, ownership reverts immediately to the beneficiary. Stefan looked at the notebook in his other hand, the archive he had just tried to incinerate in front of 12 witnesses. At that exact moment, the double doors swung open. The hostess looked pale. Chef? The critic is here. He's early. And he's asking for the storm bisque. Stefan looked at the pot. He looked at the notebook he couldn't read. He looked at Felix. He was trapped. He couldn't cook the soup without the notebook. And he couldn't read the notebook without Felix. Felix, Stefan stammered, his tone shifting instantly to a desperate plea. Felix, please. If we fail tonight, the restaurant closes. For both of us. Just help me fix the seasoning. Felix walked past Stefan. He didn't look at him. He gently took the notebook from Stefan's limp hand. He smoothed out the cover where the fire had kissed it. I will cook, Felix said, tying his apron tighter. But you're not the chef anymore. You're the dishwasher. He pointed to the sink piled high with dirty prep bowls. Scrub. Quietly. Stefan stood there, paralyzed. The kitchen staff watched, holding their breath. Then, slowly, Stefan lowered his head. He walked to the sink. He picked up the sponge. Felix opened the notebook to page 42. Service, he shouted, his voice cracking like a whip. Yes, chef. The entire brigade roared back, louder than they had ever shouted for Stefan. The service was flawless. The critics' review the next morning didn't mention the decor or the wine. It focused entirely on the bisque. Asterisk, for a moment. Asterisk, the review read. Asterisk, it tasted like a ghost was in the kitchen. The king has returned. Asterisk, 2 weeks later, the sign out front was being repainted. Felix stood on the sidewalk, watching the workers. He held the notebook. He had had it rebound, but he kept the burn mark on the corner. He opened it to the very last page, past the deed, to a note he hadn't shown Stefan. It was in his grandfather's handwriting. Asterisk. Cooking is act of giving. Greed burns the sauce. If you are reading this, you learned the difference. Felix smiled, closed the book, and walked into his restaurant. Late that night, as Felix locked up, he heard a scratching sound from the alley. He opened the back door. Stefan was there, looking disheveled, holding a cheap notebook of his own. I tried to write down how you did the lamb, Stefan muttered, looking at his feet. But I can't get the sauce to emulsify. Felix looked at the fallen man. He could have told him to leave. Instead, he pulled a Sharpie from his pocket. You're using cold butter, Felix said. Use room temperature. And add a drop of vinegar. He tossed the pen to Stefan and closed the door. Justice had been served. But the kitchen was no place for grudges. Only for good food.